Mimi goes through, I mean, Mimi's story is actually told through these years, I suppose. So there are sort of moments of those several years where she's back in Vietnam. She's grieving for her loss, but she hasn't given up hope entirely either of being able to find her child again. I think you see that right the way through with her journey, because she has this spirit of continuing somehow. And the thing that keeps her continuing is that need to find her daughter again. I think for Mimi, not everything was full of darkness. She meets Tuan, who she falls in love with and who loves her and adores her and only wants to keep her safe. They have this beautiful courtship.
This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba. In conversations with writers, something magical happens, and as readers, we begin to see them as human beings and not just the name on the spine of a book. And my hope is through these conversations, you learn about their craft and them as a person, and you'll become like me, fiercely loyal and want to read their current book, entire backlist, any future book, or any book they blurb. And when you see their name, you'll want to support them, not only as incredible storytellers, but also the thoughtful individuals you have come to know. My guest today is Emma Nanami Strenner, and here's a brief introduction to her. She's been a journalist for over 20 years. She has held posts at Vogue, Elle, and Stylist magazine. She's also contributed to The Times, Condé Nast Traveler, and The Telegraph. She's a beauty, wellness, and travel journalist. Her debut novel, My Other Heart, released in the U.S. this past August. Emma's British-Japanese and studied modern Chinese studies at the University of Leeds. She completed the Curtis Brown Creative 6-month novel writing course and is also a Faber Academy alumni. She has spent much of her time living abroad: Japan, Vietnam, Australia, China, Singapore, and the U.S. She currently lives in London and is working on her second novel. Makes me so happy. I was lucky enough to meet Emma last spring as she was part of a debut writing panel that I was moderating. And the great thing about moderating a panel is being able to read ahead of publication dates. The not so great thing about reading ahead of pub dates is I wanted to talk to everybody about My Other Heart. I just had to wait until August for everyone else to catch up and to know what I already knew. This is a story that captures, I think, the universal human experience, knowing who we are and wanting to belong. And congratulations to Emma, because I am not the only one who loved this book. It was selected as a Read with Jenna pick in August. So welcome, Emma.
Thank you. What a lovely intro. So I'm reeling from it.
Oh, it's all true, which is even better. So can we start to talk a little bit about My Other Heart? It opens with a really incredible tug at your heart scene in an airport.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about the opening scene?
Of course.
Because it catches you from page one.
So My Other Heart begins in 1998. Mimi is a single Vietnamese mother on her way back from Philadelphia to Vietnam. She's traveling with her 1-year-old daughter, Nan. And she's exhausted. She's battling with all the things that you do when you have a small infant with you and you have a long journey ahead of you. And for an instant, she puts her child down, takes her eye off her, and the unthinkable happens. Her daughter disappears. And in the throes of panic and not being able to communicate and not being able to sort of fully advocate for herself, she can't get the help that she needs to be able to relocate her child. And she's eventually sedated and deported. Basically, that's the beginning of the story. And we then fast forward 17 years to Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the structure of this book? Not only do you have multiple timelines, but you also have multiple characters and multiple points of view, with which I think as a reader, I think it enriches the experience for this story, being able to see things happening, the same event, but different perspectives. Can you talk a little bit about your choice of structure?
Sure. I knew I was always going to wanted to write a story about a girl who knew that she came from a certain part of the world, but felt as though she belonged to another. And so after this opening scene, we go straight to Kit and Sabrina, who are two best friends about to graduate high school in the wealthy suburbs of Chestnut Hill. Kit is mixed race. She's adopted by wealthy white parents, and Sabrina's the daughter of a single parent household, and her mother's a Chinese immigrant and works two jobs. They have very, very different socioeconomic backgrounds, but they're both about to embark on the same journey, which is that they are about to encounter a big rite of passage moment in their adolescence as they head off to college. And they're also both kind of grappling with their sense of identity. So I always knew that this sense of identity and that exploration was the real-time story, I suppose, that I wanted to tell. And then at the same time, this is also Mimi's story, the mother who loses her child at the beginning of the novel. And she's really this kind of, I guess, the through line through the novel, because it's her search that answers lots of questions that these girls have about themselves, and explores the bonds that they have with their mothers, explores their place in the world, and has them sort of questioning and facing up to answers that they may or may not be prepared for. So I think that's where sort of I wove in the different timelines so that everything could kind of come to the same point in the end.
Yeah, it was a wonderful weaving. So when you're writing that, did you write the story start to finish like we as a reader read it, or did you write one timeline and then another and then try to figure out where it fits? So how do you go about keeping track of all that?
So to any person who's really organized and structured, this is a nightmare. So feel free to mute me. I didn't work like that at all. I kind of I knew that the novel was going to open like this. I knew what the ending was going to be, and then I knew that there would be key moments, and then sometimes I would just kind of tackle whatever inspired me in that moment. And I didn't always know what was going to happen either, because this sounds really confusing, but there was method to my madness. So I think in terms of like Kit and Sabrina's storyline, I think I did follow each character in a linear fashion. I knew that there were going to be these moments. And in terms of moments that sort of went back in time, that they sort of emerged naturally. So to me, as I was writing, I sort of thought, well, I want to explore this memory that Kit has, and I want to look at how she felt at this point in time, or how did her mother view her at that point of time. And I think those kind of moments came naturally, just in the same way that you would in a conversation, I suppose, when you're discussing something. You're like, oh, do you remember like 3 years ago when this happened? It felt very sort of organic. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it weaves beautifully. So the method to your madness, I would say continue with that method, because it ended up with this incredibly remarkable story, which I think are things that we all experience, right? You know, mothers and daughters and the relationships we have with them, who you are friends with in high school, and then realizing high school's over and, you know, you're going to kind of go your own way. You know, and try to figure out kind of who you are. And I think both Kit and Sabrina end up doing that in the summer before they even leave for college. They're both on this incredible journey. So can you talk a little bit about how you develop characters, like how they came to you, or, you know, do you profile them? Do you quiz them? Are they people that you know, or composites of people you know?
Yes. I think I suppose I do profile them to a point. And I think I know it sounds strange, but as I'm writing, I start to get to know them better, because they do and say things that I'm surprised by. So I knew that Kit was going to be fairly precocious and fairly entitled. And I always knew it was fun writing her as well, because she sort of has she's an unfiltered view of like all that sort of selfishness you have when you're an adolescent, because your sort of brain hasn't fully developed. So you're only thinking about yourself sometimes, but it all comes flying out of her mouth. which a lot of people have had very strong reactions to. Like some people empathize and some people absolutely loathe Kit. And I've sort of had these responses from people, and I totally get it. And I think in that sense, I always knew what kind of person she was and what her little, I guess, vulnerable points were. And as of Sabrina was strange because for me, she really grew as the story went on. And I think you can see that on the pages because she did change a lot as I was writing her. In fact, at the beginning, she wasn't sort of supposed to be such a primary character, but I think at one point she really kind of outshines everybody else. So that was kind of like a wonderful journey. But I think I can see and feel the characters as I'm writing them because I know exactly who they are. I mean, I can't see them visually in the sense that I know exactly what they look like, but I know them, right down, sort of deep down inside of me. And that's almost more important to me than how the plot sort of unravels because they're the ones sort of leading the way.
Absolutely. There's a librarian who is based in Seattle. She is, since retired, but once a librarian, always a librarian. And she talks about the 4 doors by which people enter a book.
Yes.
And it's not exclusive. It's not like one and none of the other 3, but she talks about people read for setting. So it's taking place in, someplace someplace you want to travel to without having to leave. Talks about plot or storyline, talks about language or character. So to your point, in the writing process, it is a very character driven. I mean, there's an incredible storyline and there's an incredible sense of place that you capture when Kit travels to Japan for the summer. And you even capture Philadelphia, Center City, as they say, right? Very well. So you have all that. And then there's beautiful language. So it has all of them. But as a writer, you seem to be somebody who's really driven by character.
Definitely. Definitely. Because I think, as a writer, a person and a reader, I generally have pretty enormous feelings. I think that's probably why I found writing Kit and Sabrina. So it came to me in a very natural way because I could really lean into that sort of adolescent, gigantic feeling part of myself. But, I think when I read, it's the same. I read for sort of being able to witness somebody's interior life and understand what motivates a person, why they are the way they are. And I'm curious and nosy and I want to know all of those things. So I think when I was writing, that was so liberating because I could really go to town on that as well. But I think for me, it's always been about character. It's the same in when I watch something great, on television. Like I just finished watching that show Task, which is actually set in Pennsylvania with Mark Ruffalo. And the way they explore those characters, there's so many layers and it is so character driven, even though there's this really enthralling plot behind this series. It is so much about the journeys that these characters go through. And I think for me as a writer, that's for me where the magic happens, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that's true as a reader, and it's nice to see it developed in a story, that's shown, that's, a little bit more one-dimensional than a book. I think that's the magic of books, is being able to understand and at the same time relate. The summer before I went to college, did I travel to Japan? No, but do I understand that feeling of, okay, who am I? Who am I going to be? Because I'm not with the same people when I go to college, right? You worry about friendships lasting because obviously you're not in the same place anymore. So you do this incredible job of making us feel that we're right there with that character, right in that same room, right in that same, having that same type of conversation. I think we've all had them.
Yes.
So it's so beautifully done. You mentioned getting feedback from readers in terms of like character, did they not liking Kit or liking Kit or understanding Kit. So I would say absolutely, you've done your job as a writer, because for us as readers, and you as a reader as well, to have that visceral response to a character.
Definitely. I mean, I think you need to I think even when I was a journalist, I remember this was when I was really junior. An old boss of mine got a letter of complaint about something she'd written. I was assisting her at the time, and I was really stressed about it. I was like, "What are you going to do? You've had this letter of complaint." She's like, "This is my job. I'm getting a reaction. Like
Yeah.
this is that's me writing and reaching somebody." And I think it's the same thing at a party, isn't it? You go to a party and someone leaves you with a deep impression, positive or negative, but it's much better to have been one of those than deeply forgettable, I think.
True. I think, was it Toni Morrison or Maya Angelou said, people will long forget what you've said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
Yes.
So yes, these characters had quite an impression. How did, your background is journalism, you're still telling and communicating a story. How did that influence writing a novel?
I think in the sense that when I was writing, wellness and beauty features, I always preferred the features that had stories about people. So that always drew me in. And I think the observation element helped me a lot as well. It helped me in terms of painting a sort of fuller picture of characters, because you could just tell so much. You could show so much about a person from an action or a habit that they might have, as small as it is. The only thing I found really hard was I definitely thrive in having a bit of pressure in terms of deadlines and knowing that there's like public humiliation, at risk if I don't hand my work in. And writing into the void was quite difficult for me because nobody was sort of saying, where are my 1,000 words? I had to sort of self-discipline. So that was my greatest challenge, I think, in not having this fast turnaround.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But I guess, I think the wonderful thing when you're writing a novel is there's sort of no limit really to how many times you can go over something and change it a little bit, and then change it just a tiny bit, and it can change the whole direction of a story or the whole direction of a character's arc. And I think that was really exciting, to be working in a space that was that sort of free in a way.
Yeah, without a doubt. I guess you can't quite do that as a journalist.
No, not with 700 words. And,
no, exactly. And I think it's almost harder to write short rather than
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. During your process of writing, did you have like a beta reader that would read those 1,000 words just to kind of give you an idea of how you were doing? So you didn't like, okay, here's 100,000 words, and oh well, I would have known that then.
I did. I have so I was quite lucky. So first, initially, because I did the Curtis Brown creative course, I had, you take turns in sending your work out and you're reviewed by your peers, which is kind of terrifying because my beta reader is my lovely Icelandic friend who is my greatest cheerleader. I mean, she's a wonderful writer herself, and she's a voracious reader, and she's sort of the kind of person who gives you critiques, but in the most beautifully packaged way that it doesn't feel like it's a critique. You're just like, what a wonderful idea. But actually, she's just my perfect person to send things to. It's very safe and nurturing.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I also had to give my work to my peers. And of course, we had lots of different writers who were writing lots of different genres. And some people it didn't reach. And that was kind of terrifying to let it out of the box for the first time. But good practice, I think, to expose yourself in that way, because you've got to sort of start building up your skin to that, I think.
Yeah. Small doses, I guess, is helpful, kind of practice.
Definitely.
So if we go back to My Other Heart, these two characters, Kit and Sabrina, they seem incredibly opposite. You alluded to, Sabrina being raised by a single mother who has like multiple jobs to try to keep everything together, versus Kit, who's in this lap of luxury. And it's amazing how we influence one another. A conversation with somebody will propel us to action. And I think about Sabrina being super excited to tell Kit that she was planning to travel that summer to kind of trace her roots, figure out, where she came from, and have that sense of identity, reinforced or challenged, or whatever the right experience would be for her. So then all of a sudden Kit thinks, I don't know if it's a one-upper, but it's oh, that sounds like a great idea. I should try that too. And Kit is able to go on unforeseen circumstances. Sabrina ends up staying, which I think we've all been there. Like, people have an opportunity before we do, or that type of thing. You know, you talked about Kit being precocious and Sabrina being a little bit more quiet and reserved, but you do a really great job. There's a scene from when they were in high school. Mrs. Sanderson, improv.
Mrs. Saunders, yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that scene and how it influenced Sabrina?
I think so. Mrs. Saunders has a drama class every week in high school, and Sabrina particularly dreads that class because she is generally an introvert. She likes to stay in the shadows. I don't know, actually, if that's right. She does stay in the shadows, and it's always in Kit's shadow that she sort of exists. And it's towards the end of her school year, and occasionally Mrs. Saunders will announce that there's going to be an improvised monologue.
I'm already feeling sick to my stomach hearing about that.
I would as well. I couldn't think of anything worse. And Sabrina's much smarter than me because I could never say anything as eloquent as she did. Lo and behold, the dreaded moment arrives, and Mrs. Saunders asks her to give a monologue because she hasn't been up there yet. And she gives her a prompt, which is, "My mother always says." And she talks about her mother. And at first she's sort of hesitant and stays sort of, I guess, in her corner. But then as she begins to talk, I think she starts to find her voice. She gets a bit of confidence as well because she hears people responding in the audience, and that she's not this mute, ignored person that's always in the corner. And as she emboldens, she really opens up and talks about this unique relationship she has with her mother, which is the thing that really makes her stand out as well, because she too has her own sense of trying to understand where she belongs, because she has this one culture at home, which is this conservative Asian mother who has those values that she's expecting hard work, and she's expecting her to live by the rules that she lived by. And she's receiving this very liberal Western education, on the other hand, in her high school. And I think you really see that come to life as Sabrina starts to speak. And it's also the same moment in which I think Kit realizes that Sabrina isn't just happy to be in the shadows. And that adds a little more tension to their relationship. And Dave, who has been Kit's on and off love interest for most of that year, also notices Sabrina for the first time. So I think in many ways it's the first moment that Sabrina really feels seen.
I think about the prompt that she's given, right? And then she's hesitant, as you mentioned. And then the teacher says, oh dear, start with the truth. Sometimes the truth is all it takes. And that kind of opens her up. And how great that people in her class were inspired. And that really resonated. But it allowed her, as you said, to find her voice. And it started with that kernel of truth.
Yes.
And then just expanded to this wonderful, I don't know if it would be considered a monologue, to really give insight into how she feels and how she kind of is tired of being invisible and held to these really high standards at home, which nobody sees. They just see her as Sabrina, who's somewhat quiet, a little bit aloof. So it makes me think, like, if Ms. Saunders would have called on Kit, what Kit's monologue would have been like.
Absolutely.
Very different.
I think so.
Very different experiences.
Yes, I think so. It's also interesting too, because I think Kit's experience at home is so different in that she has this gigantic elephant in the room, which is her adoption and her biological mother. And Sally, her mother, is so terrified of how far she's going to go into that search, because she guards that relationship and this environment that she's created for her daughter so carefully. I feel for Sally, there's so much tiptoeing, which is the kind of exact opposite of how Lily is with Sabrina, who Lily just sort of blurts out everything she's thinking and expects Sabrina to do exactly as she's told. Whereas I think Sally's approach to Kit is so different. And then, of course, you see that in her personalities as well.
Yeah, I just think it's so wonderful when you have the two opposites and seeing them come together on something common, and the tension it creates and the impact that it has, as we sometimes act and react in reaction to what others have done.
Yes.
So it's so wonderfully written. Sabrina also talks about her love language in that monologue, which I think, wow, that's great, because then it makes everybody start to think as a reader, like, wow, what is my love language?
Yes.
And how does that impact kind of my life experience, right? If that's where you feel most comfortable or most seen, that sense of belonging.
It's interesting because all the people I've spoken to, particularly because I'm part of this East and South Asian literary society here in the UK, and there's a lot of writers and artists and poets who have Asian heritage. And that part where we talk about the love language being food, it resonates so deeply with everyone, because I think, and I have this too. I mean, I don't come from a family that hugs and says I love you all the time. I mean, my own family, my parental family, whereas my own immediate family now with my daughter and my husband, we say I love you. I mean, we say it all the time. It must be very annoying. I love you, good night. I love you, good night. It's constantly like throughout the house. And there's a lot of sort of hugging and touching. But I came from the kind of family that didn't have that, and I think a lot of people with Asian heritage who have that sort of first generation immigrant parent experience probably relate to that too, because it just sort of, it isn't in that culture in the same way. Whereas food is absolutely, food just says so much in terms of effort and love that's poured into a simple dish. Even, it just speaks volumes, I think, in that culture for sure. In Japanese culture, absolutely.
I was reading a book a couple weeks ago, and it was about a family from Thailand, and I guess the Thai word for family is coming around the table.
Right.
And so I think it speaks to that food, that love language that connects us. And I guess I would be third generation, but we still, like, during holidays, have all those traditions and foods and customs and things that we say as a nod back to, but still is that sense of identity and family.
Definitely. I think so. I mean, I remember, I have this really distinct memory when I was growing up, and I was going to kindergarten very close to where my Japanese grandparents lived, and they were, they didn't speak any English, so it was very traditionally a Japanese household. And my grandma wasn't sort of someone who said affectionate things or complimented you, or it wasn't that kind of relationship. But every day when I would go to school, I would open up my bento box and I would have this incredibly intricate bento that she'd made, and she'd made a picture with the ingredients on the rice, and that sort of says so much. And so I never questioned the love, because it's sort of all said in this silent, unspoken gesture, which is kind of beautiful as well. Yeah.
And how very thoughtful, that you're
definitely
still looking to find a connection and express her love and affection for you.
Definitely.
Can we talk a little bit about Kit and Sabrina and the summers they had? How Kit travels to Japan and how she ends up staying with a family that her mom knew.
Yes. Yes. A family connection. So the family that Kit stays with in Tokyo, she stays with the Buchanans. And Rick Buchanan is an old high school friend of Sally's, and he is the American ambassador to Tokyo. And she goes to stay with him, which works out brilliantly for Sally because Kit gets to go and have her independent adventure extremely far away, but also sort of under the safety and guard of a family friend. But I think what's most interesting for Kit is that she meets Rio and Amy, who are also mixed and refer to themselves as half, which is what the term used a lot in Japan when you are you have one parent who's Japanese and another parent who isn't. And I would be asked this all the time. Oh, are you half? You know, and that's the sort of term used. And so I think Kit has this strange feeling of aspirational longing to belong in a way, because it's all so exciting and different for her, and feels really cosmopolitan and far away from Chestnut Hill, which is the only home she's ever known. But she also feels as though her ambiguous background isn't the central identifying factor about her, which I think she often grapples with when she's back home. So that's the opening point, I think, to her sort of having this experience. But it's definitely a slow burn for her. It's not like she has this great awakening necessarily, but I do think she has this sense that the world is big and she's not always going to be her ambiguous background isn't always going to be the only thing that's interesting about her. Whereas, meanwhile, Sabrina stays closer to home, and she gets a job at the country club, and she develops a friendship with Dave, who is Kit's previous love interest. And they have a very slow but trusting, quite authentic friendship that starts to build. And she also goes and does sort of an internship with a lady called Eva Kim, who is an activist there for Asian immigrants. And Eva Kim is very sweary. She's always swearing. And she says everything as it is, but she has the biggest heart. And she really sees Sabrina for who she is and really helps to empower her and open her up. And she's really a key character in the book. It's interesting with Eva Kim particularly because I actually had never even planned her at all. I sat down and she just kind of showed up. And I know that sounds really woo-woo and nuts, but she really did just show up. And you know, she is an insistent person who, I guess, when she has her mind fixed, does exactly what she wants to. So she was not going anywhere when it came to editing anything out. But no, she's, we all love Eva Kim. Everybody needs an Eva Kim.
Yeah, she's probably one of my favorite characters. Not just in the book, but that I've read this year.
Really?
Just admiring her. And the fact that she has language issues, I kind of can relate. Mom will tell you, can at work. But so understanding that, and the directness, but at the same time, it's coming from a good place.
Yes.
There's a point in there where she's talking to Sabrina and she says, you know, I'll fight to the end. And you'd be surprised how far you can get when someone is willing to fight for you. Sometimes it's all you need, actually, a person who is willing to fight for you. And I just think, man, we all need an Eva Kim in our life, or to channel our own Eva Kim.
Yes.
But just the work that she does and how often Sabrina will say, you know, she sat there, but like Eva will ask her a question and doesn't do anything, just waits for her to respond and is comfortable with that silence that for introverts, sometimes it takes a while to, you know, put feelings or thoughts into words. And that patience that she shows Sabrina somewhat, I think, is reminiscent of that moment where she's on improv day, where she kind of found her voice and that sense of confidence that what I have to say matters and the right people will listen. And then how throughout the summer that is kind of reinforced in her work with Eva. I mean, not just the work that they're doing, the work that Eva does with Sabrina while they're working.
Yes. I mean, I think also the magic with Eva is that she's just incredibly accepting. And you could say the worst possible thing to her and she would still sit there and not jump to judgment immediately and accept you as you are. And I think the reason why I found writing her particularly she was so great to write, and she was just so great to have in the story, is that, you know, I my own cultural background is Japanese and British, and that those aren't two cultures that are known for being direct. But Eva is the exact opposite of that, and there's something really liberating and wonderful to be next to somebody like that who just says exactly what they're thinking. But yes, she's a great character, great company in every way.
Absolutely. One other lesson I think was probably one of my favorite, bits in the book is that nobody ever makes you feel small because you're different or because you were brought up with less than some. Nope. But I think you'll find the people you want to be around, the people who inspire you, the places you feel accepted, and you'll start to care a lot less. Time will be your friend. Everything is temporary. I did it. The good and the bad, none of it is forever. And if nothing else, just wait. And that's one of those things, one of the favorite lessons in the book. And I know you didn't set out to necessarily tell lessons, but wow, that hit like a ton of bricks. Because I think we've all felt that way.
Yeah.
Whether we're high school, getting ready to go to college, whether we're switching careers, we move to a different city, but that whole like trying to figure out where you belong, which is different than fitting in, because fitting in basically means you're kind of selling your soul to be what everybody wants you to be.
Yes.
Versus belonging, where you can just be who you are and people are happy that that's
Definitely.
who you are.
I also think that there's this sort of, I think there is something in, and I'm learning about this now too, because my daughter's 10 and I can see she's starting to go through slightly more complicated friendship dynamics. And I think, what Eva says too about how it's, you have to feel good about your interactions. You have to feel good about the people you choose to sort of have around you and in your life. And that's something I think I try to teach my daughter, but I'm trying to learn myself too. I think it's a lifelong lesson. I mean, I don't think that ever goes away. It is. But you do have to sort of, I think it's quite hard to know. I think it's quite hard to realize until after you have an interaction sometimes, whether you felt good or bad, or you couldn't quite put your finger on it. And I think that's what she says. And it's so important, especially to somebody who's still growing up. You're like, your brain isn't fully developed yet, so protecting your sense of self is so important. And I think she's such a great champion for that.
Well, I'm so glad your daughter has you to help champion that lesson. And, people talk a lot about, jobs and careers. Unfortunately, sometimes that's how we end up defining ourselves initially until, kind of wade through and have more meaningful conversations. But the thing that I tell people a lot is it's important to love what you do. It's not going to be perfect because I haven't found it at least yet. No perfect job out there, but I think it's just as important who you do that job with.
Yes.
Definitely. Because you can have a fantastic job, but if you work with colleagues who are just, I hate to use the word toxic because it's like the word of the year, or who don't make you feel like your best self, or who don't inspire you to be better.
Definitely. And you have some semblance of control over that too. And I think that's the part that it's difficult to sort of learn how to execute that, like what part of that you can control, how much exposure you give yourself to, I don't know if it's a toxic person at work or a toxic person in a friendship group that you don't want to be around. But it's so hard, that part when you're growing up, I think is really difficult to learn and to have that type of self-control as well.
Absolutely. So I would think during their summer journeys, both Sabrina and Kit found what they perceived to be their sense of belonging and their voice, and somewhat of a coming of age, which is so important to know at that age, more about who you are and what you value and what's important. I think they both experienced that in two completely different ways. But it was just a wonderful, wonderful storyline for sure. Talk about Mimi, that we know the scene opens up 17 years before with her daughter Nan, disappearing, vanishing essentially in an airport. And then throughout the story, we hear from her perspective. We hear what it was like once she was, as you said, and we read, sedated and sent back home
Mm-hmm.
to Vietnam and
Mm-hmm.
what that struggle was like and
Mm-hmm.
what she did in order to try to continue to find her daughter.
Yeah.
You talk a little bit about that relentless spirit of Mimi.
Yes. So Mimi goes through, I mean, Mimi's story is actually told through these years, I suppose. So there are sort of moments of those several years where she's back in Vietnam. She's grieving for her loss, but she hasn't given up hope entirely either of being able to find her child again. I think you see that right the way through with her journey, because she has this spirit of continuing somehow. And the thing that keeps her continuing is that need to find her daughter again. But I also think that I think for Mimi, not everything was full of darkness. She meets Tuan, who she falls in love with, and who loves her and adores her and only wants to keep her safe. They have this beautiful courtship when she's working in the hotel, and that is, I suppose, in her way, it's her moment of building back up the strength again, where she's starting to find the hope and belief that she will be reunited again somehow with her daughter. And as you follow Mimi's story, eventually she gets a job as a domestic helper on a fancy expat compound in Saigon. And one of her employers helps her with a sort of bit of internet research and following a few sources to try to see if there are any possible leads back in Philadelphia. And that's kind of what leads her back eventually to Philly to try and find her daughter again. But I think the thing that I found so difficult when I was writing Mimi was her complete helplessness at the beginning of the novel, because she's in a country where she doesn't really speak the language. She probably doesn't fully understand what her rights are either. I think she is fairly powerless and invisible in her entire existence there, which means no one's really looking when someone takes her child. And this is where the sort of beginning of her tragedy is. And then it's how hard she has to work, all the adversity she has to overcome just to even get back to Philly and try to find her daughter again. But I find Mimi's spirit she's tough in many ways. She works these tough jobs, but she has this hope that's constantly in her, sort of burning, which takes her back to trying to find Nan in any way that she can.
Yeah, Mimi is an incredible character, and the scenes in the beginning of Mimi's story where she is invisible and powerless and doesn't have that same sense of agency. And how many of us would, if we were in another country where we didn't speak the language, we didn't understand the rule of law and the procedures and the things that you need to do. So understanding that, but similar to like Sabrina and Kit kind of coming into her own, figuring out who she is. And I think at one point she talks about, she has these really, tough jobs and she's like, but I've already gone through like the worst that could possibly happen. So I want to say, like, from that point forward, I guess she realizes her strength. It's not always easy to follow through. People are like, oh, you're so strong. You're so courageous. Yeah. While inside you're like, I'm not so sure. Yeah. But I thought, and it just really resonated, that these parallel journeys, this universal thing of who am I and who are the people that I'm meant to, to belong to or with. Yeah.
And I think for her, what I think is kind of interesting for her is that she only remembers her child, obviously, as a baby. And then suddenly she's having to contend with the prospect that her daughter is possibly fully Americanized and speaks a language that she doesn't understand. So there's this whole other world that her daughter belongs to or is a part of that she isn't. And I think that's the aspect of her loss and not being able to fill in the gaps, I guess, as well. That sort of layers her experience with sort of different facets as well.
And yet, in spite of the, losing Nan at the airport, we're more than the bad things that happen to us, right? She's able to find this wonderful husband You know, she has these jobs where she becomes part of the family, and is loved and accepted, and obviously must be a really great person for, you know, her quote unquote boss, you know, the women of the household, right, in that expat who, you know, Ms. New Zealand or, you know, Ms. America, help her, right? You don't help. I mean, most of us don't always help everyone we know. But I think it speaks to her sense of agency, and knowing that yes, it was a big thing and she's never going to stop searching, but at the same time, she doesn't let it define her. She doesn't isolate and, you know, not spend time with other people. So I think there's a lesson in there, I think, for all of us.
Yes. And I think also the way that Tuan's love really brings her back to life in some ways as well. So that's the sort of restorative nature of love in a way.
And just those scenes with him waiting outside, just a sweet harkens back to just this neat romance. I mean, I see the whole thing playing out as a movie because it's just so fantastic. These characters and their backgrounds and life experiences and how they all end up coming together. So, you know, Eva talks a little bit too. I mean, I keep bringing her up because I think what she says we see throughout the other nuances in the storyline. She talks about a self-limiting cage that you've built around yourself, you know, and here's the shocker. That person might even be you. You just haven't met this version of yourself yet. And I just think, what a fantastic line. And I think it's true for all the characters. I think Mimi, you know, at the very beginning, I don't think she would have realized herself capable of surviving that.
Absolutely. When she's there sort of lying in the room and in her sister's place. And I think I think as far as she's concerned, this is the end, you know, she's in the darkest possible place. I agree. And I think for Sabrina too, there's so much, she's believed so much about where she believes the box that she's been put in is the right one. And it's really only in that summer when she starts to realize, actually, maybe I'm not this obedient child that my mother always tells me I am. Maybe I'm not this sort of quiet person who sits in the corner and doesn't speak up for herself. And I think that's definitely a huge part of Sabrina's journey as well.
Yeah, I would also say probably Kit's too. I mean, because she starts, we learn early on in the book that she starts her own origin story. That she came from Japan. Very kind of interesting that she kind of put that cage or that limit or that label, for lack of a better word, around herself that kind of influenced everything moving forward.
And I think that's the other thing for Kit's journey is that she goes to Japan to broaden her horizons, but in many ways she knows where she feels safest and she feels most comfortable, and sometimes that's the place you want to stay in. You know, it's not necessarily in the discomfort and the scary parts, the scary places that you want to go. It's just that maybe she has to go to Japan to realize that.
Exactly. I think towards the end, after Kit comes back and she's talking to Sabrina, just this keen sense of observation, knowing the quote unquote roles she plays with her friend, what Kit needs to hear, or wants to hear versus what she needs to hear. Right. And she talks about like Kit would just blow up because she couldn't find peace in herself. She didn't like the sum of her parts. And I just think that's really interesting. She went all this way to Japan to kind of discover where she was and whether or not she reckoned with it or reconciled with it. Who's to say?
Yes.
So, it's hard to believe we're about done.
Oh, okay.
Oh my gosh,
lovely.
It is. Yeah. I was going to say I could talk to you the whole rest of the day, but
what a lovely way to spend an hour or 45 minutes. I don't know how long's gone by, but it's been so nice.
Thank you. So I'm going to wrap up with Story's End. Final 5 questions.
Okay.
So Sabrina describes her mother's love language, and I can't pronounce the word.
Balza.
Balza. improv day. What's your love language?
Oh, I want to sound really profound, but it is
You
probably
are
gifts.
profound.
It's probably gifts. And my husband will, he'll confirm that.
Okay. Yeah. Best gift he ever gave.
Do you know, I was having this really lovely bonding moment with my daughter last night because we're both total stationery buffs, and she has now discovered her love for stationery and lovely notebooks as well. So I was like, oh, this is so great. So we're going to really connect over this. And I found an old notebook that he bought me when we went to Florence for a weekend, I think, but I was 29 at the time. And that was
Last year.
Yeah, last year. But it was, and he had a little note in it. It's from this beautiful notebook store called Il Papiro, and it's just that all the notebooks are handmade. And I sort of saw that, and I thought that's really beautiful. So that's a wonderful gift. Notebooks always hit the mark.
Notebooks, paper, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And what a fun way to connect with your daughter over that.
Yeah,
there's no the art of handwriting things.
Yes,
is not lost.
No, it's wonderful. And she's writing little stories, and it's fun. We're going to go stationery shopping on Thursday.
Yeah, very fun. You've traveled a lot in your life. Where's one place you wish you could stay longer?
One place I wish I could stay longer. I think it was India. I went to India. We went on a honeymoon, actually. Aww. And I had this. I've always been such a sucker for these epic, sweeping Indian novels that are multi-generational. I just finished Kiran Desai's The Loneliness of Sonia and Sonny.
It's on my list.
It's so amazing.
I can't wait.
And but when I was there, it was just something just really moved me, because it is life at its most extreme in all different ways, and it was over too quickly, and you just don't even touch the surface really. So I think it would be to go back to India and see all the different places there.
There's a sign above the BP compound in Ho Chi Minh City that you reference in your book, that adversity is the mother of all wisdom. Yes. What piece of wisdom have you learned during a period of adversity?
I think I think probably because I've had to move a lot, and while I never regret it, I never regret moving. But I also dread it when it happens, because I loathe change, which is the great contradiction. But I think probably that I can't sort of spend all this time worrying about what ifs. Now, that's not to say I listen to the advice, because I do worry a lot about what ifs, but generally sort of control what you can control, and try not to waste the energy on the stuff you can't, I think.
Fair. Mm-hmm. Who in this book would you take a trip with?
I think I would take a trip with probably Sabrina. I think I'd probably enjoy her company the most, also because I quite like silence as well, and I feel like she would respect those boundaries for me.
True. I mean, there's only certain people, certain friends that silence is comfortable with.
Yes.
That is a gift.
It is. So I think she would be a good person. We could sit there in silence and read our books, and we wouldn't need to fill it. That would be
perfect.
Nice. Yeah.
And then the final question, right? So you weave music throughout this book, including my favorites like Fleetwood Mac, and then, Bach's cello.
Yes.
What song would you always include on a playlist?
I would always include. This was really difficult for me with the music, because I didn't know that music lyric rights were really expensive. So in my first edit, it was littered with lyrics everywhere. And I had to really cut back on that. But I'm glad that you could still spot the music in there.
Yeah.
It would be a Massive Attack song, and I can't believe that it's completely gone out of my head, the one that it is, because it has a line that says love is a doing word in it. And it's on the playlist. I can find it actually. But it would be a Massive Attack song, I think, would always make it onto the list.
Yeah, I was amazed with the different ends and, Sabrina's love for quote unquote older music. And I was like,
yeah.
Fleetwood Mac, that's not old. And I was like, oh yeah, Jen, you're old.
It's also like the Hootie and the Blowfish, Teardrop by Massive Attack.
Okay. Yeah.
But yes, she and I had to put in Hootie and the Blowfish because that was so critical for me during my final year of high school. So it was sort of an ode to all my friends.
which I appreciate, because when I was in college, I went to a small school for undergrad, and was on this committee that would book concerts on campus, right? So you would get demo tapes, this is how old I am, right? Demo tapes from musicians. And I remember Hootie and the Blowfish having their demo tape, and I was like, who's this? Hootie and the Blowfish? And then, whoops, you didn't get that one quite right.
So were they at the college with you?
They were not, but they had wanted to play. So Toad the Wet Sprocket came.
Oh yes.
I can remember driving them back and forth to their hotel from campus. It's a small school, 1,100 students total.
Wow.
So that's and then playing aerobie with them during sound check.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's really kind of amazing. But I'm like, oh, it could have been Hootie.
It could have been Hootie and Cowboy Junkies. I don't know. They're also, music's really important, I think. Definitely.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all for listening, and a huge thank you to Emma Strenner for joining us today. And I hope you've all been delighted to hear from Emma, and we'll go out and get a copy of My Other Heart right away, and then whatever book she is currently working on. And to see who my next guests are, visit storytocount.com. This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba.
Thank you so much.